Title card. Up next, Ames City Council. The Mayor, City Council, and the City Manager sit at a curved dais. Assistant City Manager Brian Phillips and construction company representatives sit at the staff table.
Good evening. I call the special meeting of the Ames City Council to order for Tuesday, June 16th. Welcome, everybody. We'll start out with, we have two items on the agenda. First is ordinance. Second reading of ordinance on zoning text amendment for accessory dwelling units, which updates the ordinance language has been updated to reflect the motion that was made last week by council. Any questions for staff? Entertain motion on second reading.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Aye.
Aye.
I was waiting for it.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. And for those who may be visiting, this is a workshop. This is not a regular city council meeting. You're welcome to participate and listen. We're glad you're here. If you came and are interested in anything relative to the data center, there'll be no public input. There's no communication going on regarding that. The only thing that will be taken up tonight at the end of the meeting would be whether or not council wants to refer this to a future city council meeting. So you're welcome to stay and listen and learn about different construction means and methods. It should be interesting for us, but just so you're aware, there's no discussion tonight, and there'll be no public input offered. So with that said, move on to staff report and construction delivery methods. Brian.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening, we've asked for some representatives from various construction companies to provide us with some expertise about the different construction delivery methods that exist for delivering a public vertical infrastructure project. So we're pleased that they were willing to participate in this and offer us a few minutes of presentation and their expertise in answering any questions the council might have. We're not asking for any action through this workshop. We're simply providing this information so the council can be better informed. So I'm happy to turn it over to our panelists. First, we'll do some introductions. So from De Novo Construction Solutions, just to my right here, is Brandon Griffin. He's going to provide a presentation about the owner's representative model. Next to him is Mike Esposette from Story Construction, and Mike will be presenting regarding the construction manager as advisor model. And then finally, on Mike's right is Art Baumgartner and Grant Reimers representing Woodruff Construction, and they'll be discussing the construction manager at risk model. So with that, we'll turn it over to Brandon for the owner's representative model.
Hello, and thank you for having me tonight. Jumping into the construction advisor or owner's representative, the first, I guess, question to ask is what is that role and what do we do in that role? So our role would be as an independent professional maintained by an owner to help procure the construction process. We can come on board at different times of a project, whether or not the client already has an architect on staff or if they want us to help find an architect and start design. Our primary role is to help advise the owner throughout the delivery project, supporting the budget and the schedule, provide the constructability and procurement input, monitor the project progress and communicate risks, and then assist with the change management and project closeouts. So why would an owner choose a construction advisor? Certain projects, obviously, a delivery method depends on the nature of the project. So in a construction advisor role, it would be if a client needs some additional capacity, they want an independent perspective. So a lot of times a construction advisor complements a design bid build project. So our role would come on and help represent you in that and help develop bid package and develop the project budget and schedule for that design bid build project. Project visibility, if this is a high profile project, a lot of times having an independent contractor on staff is a good idea to have, just so that way any questions that come up, we can help represent you and help direct those. And then just construction experience. Our firm, like other construction advisor firms, do all the different delivery methods. So we do have general contracting, construction management as agent, and construction management as risks. So we're able to identify a lot of those construction needs in a project and help clarify those. A construction advisor, what we do, we help through the design and procurement support. We collaborate with cities, architects, design, and help in the procurement of the project, whether that be land acquisition, or if it's the city, in this case, is purchasing the product themselves. We help assist in that. We provide input during the procurement. We help do a constructability review. We can do cost estimating early on, and then help promote the project publicly throughout the bidding process. And then in construction, we help review scope changes. We provide on-site, boots on the ground reporting, so that way you, the client, understands what's going on during the whole construction process. And then we help participate in meetings with your contractors that are on board and help facilitate any discrepancies between design and construction during the project to help truly represent you, the client. So what a construction advisor does not do, we do not provide design services. Typically, that is something that the client has on board, or if it is a design build project, that is something that the contractor or the architect performs. We do not perform construction. The construction remains solely to the general contractor or whomever is bidding on the project with that. We don't hold their contracts in the construction advisor role. Those are contracted directly to the client. And then we do not replace owner decision-making. We help advise and we bring the best solution to you, but ultimately the decision still comes down to the client between that. And then we do not control the cost or the schedule outcome. We help, again, guide that and help direct those, but we are not in control of those. So when the construction advisor works best is obviously when owner capacity, if you have staff limitations, depending on project type and complexity, if there's something that you're needing additional support with that, the complexity of the project, public procurement, again, transparency, documentation. So that's a really large role that we play, is helping make sure that everything is clear and documented. We're the independent oversight, and then we are continued through the procurement and all the way through the closeout of the project, and especially on high visibility projects. So just to recap, construction advisor, we're independent and on your team through the planning, design, procurement, construction, and closeout. And really, a construction advisor for the right delivery method depends on the project goals, the owner capacity, risk allocation, schedule priorities, and the level of desired involvement.
Mayor, how do you want to facilitate dialogue? Should we wait till everyone makes a presentation, or should we engage person by person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's appropriate to ask questions at the end of each presentation because we got 3 of them. So if you have questions, please go ahead.
So first of all, Brandon, thanks for your comments tonight. We're trying to learn how to do this better. We've got some big projects coming up, and our duty on behalf of the city is to try to get this right. And this is complex. And so the dialogue we have to, and my question is for you, but in some ways it's giving all of you a chance to hear at least what this council member's questions are. I am interested in situations where a particular approach is going to be more advantageous than others. So there may be a situation that's a complex construction project. Is one of these models better fit for a complex build? Whereas if we have something relatively modest in complexity and scope, then is a different model better for that? Secondly, I'll just give you these really fast and then you can respond. Secondly, I am really intrigued with how change orders are done. And I feel like we have a little bit of change order-itis. And so someone comes in, they offer a low bid, and this is a bit of a cynic in me, but maybe they know that they couldn't possibly build this for the number they bid. Am I hitting pay dirt? You think that happens? Yeah, me too. And so what concerns me, we ask our staff to be articulate and thoughtful in the scope of the project and to provide an accurate set of plans to allow a contractor to provide an accurate number in a bidding process. And then we deal with some pretty substantial change orders. And I understand my dad was a small contractor. I get it. Sometimes there are unanticipated circumstances. In my mind, that's what a change order is for, if there's something beyond the control. But my stars, we're dealing with a lot of change orders. And then finally, it would be helpful, and I'm not asking for a food fight tonight, okay? But really not. But if there are ways in which you can help us, and this I'm speaking to all of you, to give us some factors that would help distinguish your approach from the others. So we're not throwing people on the bus. I just work under the presumption that there are sweet spots for all of you, but there may be other areas that wouldn't be a sweet spot. And so I don't know if I'm this helps other council members, but this is what I'm hoping to accomplish tonight, if that's helpful. So if you want to take a shot at any of those right now, or this is going to be a fairly dynamic conversation, but if there's anything that jumped out at you with what I said, then feel free to offer an answer.
Yeah, I think that's great. And jump in at any time, guys, because we all have different experience too. But your first question about the model for complex projects. Currently, I guess in our industry, I would say that is the CMAR role, just as you get in there. So when you get a CMAR, not to steal Art's thunder, they're involved early on with design and help to design the project throughout and help, you go out and price things as you're going, and a contractor might say, hey, that's no longer a good product. Don't spec that before bid date. We can adjust those and help value engineer the project throughout that before they have their bid day. So Art, tell me if you,
I would generally agree with that construction manager at risk does help with complex projects. I would say actually all three of these are good for complex projects in various ways. And for us, Tim, you ask, what is a project or model that's a good fit for our various companies? So Woodruff is a self-performing contractor. So we do concrete and steel and equipment setting and process piping. So we generally like construction manager at risk model because it does allow for self-performance of work. Whereas the construction manager as advisor that Mike's talking about, or the owner's rep, is more of a consultant, construction consultant role and advisory role. So we tend to not gravitate towards those projects or opportunities when they arise. So that's just speaking from our experience.
Yeah.
Grant, do you have anything to add there?
I'll let you finish, and then I think what we'll do is we'll go through all three presentations. I think some of the questions might get answered in the presentation, but go ahead and finish and then I think that became a much longer question, a lot more complex, and we're not trying to get ahead of the game here, but please go ahead.
No, I would echo what Art said. Just our company specifically, we find value in being able to control budgets and schedules by able to utilize our own resources. So being on some projects, we have actually done projects for construction managers. And it just depends who you get to, right? I've been on some that it's kind of like your contract's still with the owner, because then with the CMAR, the subcontractors actually contract through us, and there's one direct conduit from us to you guys. So I think it works well in different areas, like Art said, but that's the reason that I guess we would suggest CMAR and a lot of those applications.
Okay, very good. Mike, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll go ahead.
Could I ask Brandon one thing to clarify the staff report versus what he told us?
Sure. And then, yeah.
So you mentioned specifically that the advisor might be helpful for design bid build projects, and the staff report says we can retain a construction advisor for any of the delivery methods
Yes.
shown. Is there a reason you picked the DBB?
The specific reason I picked design bid build on that is because in these three scenarios, your construction advisor, construction manager as agent, or construction manager at risk are all an advisor to you. So if you had a construction advisor and then hired a construction manager as agent, you would be kind of doubled up on that.
Thank you.
Whereas now your design bid build contractor is truly a contractor that is going to perform the scope.
That makes sense.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, and I'll thank you for inviting us to do this. I'd say we are all conversant in all of these delivery systems. And to piggyback off of that question, a lot of times owner representatives focus on things even beyond construction, like move logistics and technology and furnishings, things that don't really fall into the traditional design and construction bucket, which is how and why they could apply in really any of these delivery systems. So the straw that I drew tonight was construction manager as an agent. And this is excerpted from a presentation that we have given many times to help people understand the differences between them. So we've grayed out some areas just to be able to focus. And in talking to Brian yesterday, we'll compare and contrast a little bit design bid build and construction manager as an agent. Two of the longer serving opportunities for public sector owners in the market. And so we've been doing construction manager as an agent work for decades in Iowa, for public universities, for cities, and a lot of K-12. So I'm not saying there's game film we haven't seen, but I'm not sure where it would be if we haven't seen it in that regard. And CMAR is very new. This has been very long-standing as an option for people in Iowa. And so the difference in the contrast, so I will draw the comparison between the first two columns. So the timing of when a GC is enrolled in a design bid build scenario is when the plans are done and out for bid. But in a construction manager as an agent role, you can bring that partner on early in the process. It's hiring a professional service. It's hiring legal counsel. It's like hiring your architect. You can hire in a very discretionary way that way. In the selection criteria and design bid build, you're pretty well obligated to hire the low bidder, where in the construction manager as an agent, you can really choose and pick your construction leader, construction partner for that. The number of contracts in design bid build, it's a single prime. In CM agency, it's multiple primes. So the contracts are held by the ownership entity and led and managed by the construction manager. In design bid build, and Tim, I think this goes to your question about, hey, if there's project complexity, what makes the most sense? I'll say one of the two delivery options that has pre-construction services, having a co-pilot with you and the design team during design is what matters. How the contracts fall are potato in some regards, but design bid build, it's harder to get the complex things right. Sometimes it's hard to get the easy things right, but it's harder to get the complex things right. And to your point about change orders, I would say the concept of prevention is better than trying to deal with them later. And nobody's perfect, but having a pre-con partner is an investment in prevention of that showing up later. Project cost, so it's determined by the low bid in the design bid build, and it's determined by the sum of the low bids in the construction manager as an agent. And that I don't think design bid build is particularly adversarial by its nature, but the contractor sits on the other side of the table. Construction manager as an agent is your representative to sit with you on your side of the table. And so this is just a depiction of how those contractual lines are drawn and how they work. And the timeline down at the bottom is the big distinction. The construction manager gets brought on during the design phase, where the GC only gets brought on once the plans are out on the street and the bidding happens. And so the design bid build bidding approach is the low bid. The other selection is discretionary, and CMAR has a whole set of criteria that are attached to it. Again, that shows up more prominently. It's more grayed out on mine. So the selection timeline of a construction manager as an agent, and a lot of the categories on the left are really delineated by CMAR that don't apply as much to CMA, but you can pick your partner in probably 4 weeks through an RFQ and a proposal process and an interview process. There's different degrees of rigor involved with CM at risk. But ultimately, it's an evaluation in the best partner for the city, in this case, to make it happen. A lot of times, there's not a lot of legislation really governing CMA. There is around design bid build, and there is around CMAR. It's more of a professional service selection, so a lot of it comes to your policy and how you procure things more so than Iowa code. So that's in the selection phase. In the pre-construction phase, you get the full suite of services from a CMAR or CMA in terms of budgeting, estimating, value engineering, constructability reviews. Again, all in the name of finding value and preventing changes later. And so then when you get to the bidding stage, the bidding process it's known in the public sector on how this works. So the CM takes the architect specifications and creates bid packages that are known to the market and generally follow along market lines. The project is promoted and put out to the market. The bidders show up with their bids on bid day and their bonds supported. So that's where the security comes from. And the bids are read aloud and documented and then ultimately vetted and awarded. And in this case, the construction manager as an agent is not a self-performer. And so we're a self-performing GC as well. So we share that in common with the Woodruff guys. And there are certain projects that are better candidates than others for self-performance. And I think that is either more or less attractive depending on maybe what the project is to the certain parties. So that's just that as you're trying to evaluate what should we do here or not here, I think the self-performance can be a big deal or a small deal depending on what the project is. And then lastly, once you get into the construction stage, it very much looks like any other project. The contracts are held by the city in this case. There's an owner contingency that a CM manages. I'd say one of the distinctions is the CM is boots on the ground every day, all day. An owner's rep might or might not be, depending on the service you would contract for. Secondly, I noticed in the staff report, there was commentary about really the architect or engineer being the arbiter, and I'd say that's true. They are generally on site every couple weeks, maybe every month. Again, that goes to how you elect to contract for that and what the visits are like. So the engagement of the design team and how you put this team together and how the roles shake out are all part and parcel to that. But in an agency CM role, generally somebody's there every day, all there, making the trains move and being your eyes and ears. And so to bring it home here, this is again just a comparative closure. I'd say a few things to point out here. The selection process here is discretionary more than prescriptive. Bid package contractors carry the bond. There's some interesting commentary in the staff report about would more people show up for a CMAR versus a CMA if they didn't need to provide a bond? Maybe, don't know. I don't know that we've seen that yet, but maybe. The fees and staff costs and things like that are really variable and flexible depending upon project circumstances and project need. The CM really acts on behalf of the owner, and this is well understood in the market. We've been doing this. We as an industry have been doing this for decades, so it's been ripped backwards through a knothole and put through all of its paces, so people understand what that is. And so last slide was just some recap of that and forms of agreement. But I'd say that's the CMA story.
that the slide you're referring to?
Yeah.
All right, Art?
All right. So being the last one to present, we have the benefit of the previous two folks introducing a lot of the same topics that we're going to talk about. So this is excerpts from a presentation we actually gave to some of your water and wastewater staff back in February, I believe. So you can go to the next slide. Mike touched on a lot of this on one of his slides.
I think Mike stole our slide deck. It looks very similar. So.
But if you compare design, bid, build, the contract structure to construction manager at risk, they're virtually identical in that the owner has two contracts, one with their architect or engineer and one with their either GC or CMAR. So the contracts look the same. They kind of feel the same. And then the construction manager as advisor and construction manager at risk, while they sound the same, they are also very different. You can hire both in design to help with, design support services. The main difference that Mike alluded to is that CMA, you have a lot of discretion to hire who you want, when you want. But with construction manager at risk, there are a lot of statutes in place with the Iowa code on how that process is done. It's done through a very specific request for qualifications process where the CMARs would submit their qualifications based on any number of factors. You would qualify or disqualify construction managers based on their experience or their safety ratings, their financial capability to do the work. Then after that is done and you've qualified or disqualified construction managers from your project, would move into the RFP phase where contractors would submit proposals. These proposals are not a bid. This is just setting the terms of the eventual guaranteed maximum price contract. So we'll have typically your fees, your sometimes your general conditions rates, your pre-construction fees, things of that nature. And then you, the owner, get to choose who you want to work with based on who provides the best overall value, is the way it's listed in Chapter 26A of the Iowa Code. And you get to define what value means. Once you've selected that CMAR and they're on board for the project, they would provide a lot of the same estimating, constructability reviews, scheduling that these other services do as well. But the one additional wrinkle is that that CMAR is in charge of a qualifications process for subcontractors as well. And the law is very intentional in the way that it is structured that, where it insulates you, the owner, from any blowback of contractors being disgruntled that they're not qualified to bid a project. So still, it's a very similar process to the prime CM being qualified. It's based on objective criteria like safety ratings, financial capacity to do the work, manpower, project experience.
And I would say this is one of the biggest differentiators. Otherwise, for the design, bid, build, or the CM as an agent, if they can provide a bond, they can bid it. So having the selection process is important. We chose to do our presentation kind of when we gave it to the city on water and wastewater. That's a fairly big part of our portfolio, and that's the project that we're currently doing with you folks. So through that process, like I said, we know who the good players and the bad players are, and being able to pick things like the safety ratings, the industry standards, and get those weeded out. That's a key part of the selection process.
Mm-hmm. So after you've qualified your subcontractors, it then moves into the bidding phases where only qualified subcontractors are allowed to bid the project. Once they do bid the project, it is similar to the traditional process where it is low bid wins, but again, it's just from that pool of qualified subcontractors. After the qualified subcontractors have bid, the CMAR takes all the numbers back to their office, kind of gets their arms around the scope, has pre-award interviews with each of the contractors to make sure that we've covered all the scope. If there's any gaps in the scope, we cover those with a robust list of assumptions, clarifications, allowances, and contingencies. So it's the subcontractor bids plus all of these allowances and contingencies to build up to a guaranteed maximum price, which is the next differentiating factor with the other delivery methods available. Guaranteed maximum price contract, ideally, if the scope doesn't grow throughout the project, should cover pretty much everything that you're going to encounter during the project. And ideally, you only have one change order at the end of the project to return unused allowances and contingencies to the owner. Jumping back to design bid build and CMA, we're showing a lot of change orders for CMA. That is only because of the fact that you might be handling many different prime contracts. And so if there's one change event on a project, it might be a change event for several different contracts. So they tend to be smaller change orders, but they're typically quantity-wise, they're more.
Since the contract's held with the owner with each prime contractor, whereas with CM at risk, like you said, the conduit is all through us, so it'd just be one change order with all the backup. So Art's worked on a lot of schools in his previous role, and he said that was one comment from owners, just you'll have a school project and you'll have, what,
15, 20.
So every time there's a change event, anytime there's a pay app, those are all being processed, and it's kind of an onerous, can be process with that.
Yep. With the GMP contract with allowances and contingencies, that's a big ask for a public entity to trust their construction partner with that GMP contract style. So there is a burden, an extra burden of open book accounting practices, very transparent practices when it comes to, how allowances and contingencies are being used. So yeah, that's this slide. Let's flip to the next one. We get asked a lot, what's a good fit for a CMAR project?
And this is kind of playing to Tim's question before, this visual for it.
A lot of owners say, is it for, should we kind of like to challenge that mentality. We like to think of it as a continuum of risk in one direction and a continuum of quality in the other direction, where those projects that have high risk and you desire high quality are a project that's a good fit for CMAR. If it's a project that there's low risk and you can get away with basic quality, I think of one-for-one replacement projects. You're replacing a bunch of carpet in City Hall or a parking lot, whatever it might be. Those are still great projects for the hard bid market.
And schedules on there too. That would be the third leg of that too.
Yep.
If you got a really tight schedule, schools are a good example. Summer specials, HVAC replacement. You got all this time to plan it and then do the work. So having a solid plan going into it, I'd say that would be another part that plays into that as well.
Yep. All right, next, actually one back. There are some funding sources that are still have some strings attached to them where they do not allow construction manager delivery methods. That is one thing to check on if you're receiving federal funding or state funding. Sometimes there are some strings attached, so you'll definitely want to check that. Next slide. Des Moines International Airport, their new terminal project is a construction manager at risk with, it's actually a joint venture with White's and Turner Construction. And I sat in with a presentation on this last fall. Brian Belt, Director of Engineering and Planning, he said, we chose CMAR because it was the project delivery method that offered the most transparent, most predictable project possible. And I wrote that down. I said, that's my elevator speech right there. But interestingly enough, they did have an owner's rep on that project as well. It's a very, very large project, very complex. So having that owner's rep to kind of extend their staff was necessary. They had some interesting things they did on that too, to acquire some federal aviation grants that needed to have a contract in place by a certain date, and they were only at 10% design. They actually delivered some GMPs early based on napkin sketch drawings. So GMP was very inflated from what I think was maybe for the parking garages really inflated GMPs.
In order to secure funding.
Based on the risk that associated with it not being designed, but it got them access to funding. They went and designed the project, realized that there was a lot of savings in the allowances contingencies coming back to the owner, and that it helped fund, I think, their 8th and 9th GMPs on the project. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you can approach the project that way. Next slide. Case study done a few years ago, comparing design bid build projects with 111 construction manager at risk projects, all for public projects. This is done at the University of Oklahoma. Flip to the next slide. A typical design bid build project will experience 33% schedule growth from the start of the project till the end of the project. A CMAR project will typically see about 8% schedule decrease. Cost as well, just getting realistic cost estimates in front of the owner early is good. Design bid build typically sees about 15.3% cost growth over the course of the project, whereas CMAR's decreases about almost 10%. Now, it is very interesting that one of the conclusions that was drawn was that there was no significant difference in cost performance between design bid build and CMAR. Well, I just got done saying that CMAR, it improved cost by 10%, whereas design bid build grew by 15%. Why is there no difference in the cost performance? So part of that is just setting expectations correctly from the start. And it's also the difference between the lump sum contract that builds up to the final contract price through change orders and a guaranteed maximum price contract that comes down to the final contract price after returning the allowances and contingencies back to the owner. But in the big picture here is that if you're choosing your construction delivery method thinking it's going to get you a project for cheaper, the data just doesn't support it. The cost of the work is the cost of the work. It's just how we get there is different. Next slide. There's a couple major lessons learned in pre-construction. Make sure your architect or engineer contract gels nicely with the CMAR pre-construction contract. Make sure that you don't have scope gaps or overlap. Define what that CMAR pre-construction deliverable is. How many estimates are they going to provide and when? And what's their constructability review process expectations? Restrict best value cost evaluation to CMAR fees. So basically this is saying your qualifications are better than price factors. You want who's most qualified on the project, not necessarily who's the cheapest. And then also select your CMAR as early as practical. The earlier you can get them involved, the sooner they can provide input on constructability, cost, and have positive impact on the project. Next slide. Might be the end. I know. So there are really 3 steps you have to follow by state law to procure your CMAR. You have to put that public notice of intent to retain a CMAR approximately 14 days before you issue the request for qualifications. Then after you've gone through and submitted the request for qualifications and evaluated those construction managers who move on to the request for proposal process, there is a 4th optional step to have interviews. It is not required by law, but we are seeing it with greater frequency. I can't remember the last CMAR project we had that didn't have an interview, so very common to have that. We have templates, blank templates, Word documents and spreadsheets for to help you with this process of procuring CMAR. I believe Story Construction has some. I have not checked to know if you guys have similar, but a lot of different contractors do this. We just want to make it easy for municipalities and owners to utilize this process since it is somewhat new for the state of Iowa. All right. Any questions?
All right. Anything else, Brian, you want to bring up? I will just remind council that You all received a letter from Harold Pike from the Competitive Bidding Alliance presenting the other alternative, which is a traditional design bid build. Yeah, declined to attend, but that is another alternative too. So anyway, anything you want to add, Brian?
Just that, as we indicated in the staff report, we have some experience with a variety of these different construction delivery methods. We have plenty of experience with design bid build to the traditional general contractor method. We are planning to utilize an owner's rep model for the fire station number 2 relocation project. We're currently underway with a construction manager as advisor with the Resource Recovery and Recycling Campus. The only model that we don't have much experience with from city staff's experience is with the CMR. And that is something that we indicated in the staff report. We are interested in exploring for the Ames Municipal Energy Center project, the power plant project on the former coal yard site. We're determining whether that's the right path for us to proceed with in that particular project because of the complexity and the logistics of integrating all the different trades and technologies that are involved there. So again, we are not asking for any particular direction tonight. This is simply informational. We want to be able to maintain the flexibility to choose the approach that best fits the particular project that we're pursuing. And so I'd like to thank these gentlemen for attending to help us understand a little bit more about that. And if there are questions from the council, we can certainly field those as well.
All right, Tim, we'll go back to you and see if your questions got answered and if you have any follow-up questions.
Well, certainly, and thanks for all those answers. And I think that we're starting to get some handles on these. One question that came up a little bit in my mind with your comments, Art, hypothetically, let's just say that a city had a construction project and there was a problem with a subcontractor. Not that that would ever happen, but just hypothetically, say that we're in a universe where that happened. Could you help us understand the relationship between these different approaches when there is a problem with the project in a subcontract, with a subcontractor's performance? Are all of these the same, or are there differences that we should understand?
So some of it has to do with what is the contractual arrangement between the GC or the CM and their subcontractors. So our standard subcontract for years, for decades, has allowed Woodruff to step in and supplement if we have a subcontractor who's not performing. What we mean by the supplement is we can hire another contractor to carry out that work and then forward that charge on to the subcontractor.
Could you stay with that for a second? Because I'm not sure I'm understanding.
I think I know what you're asking more forwardly. So we were talking about before the contract style, and Art's going a little bit deeper. What it is the contract with the subcontractors with Woodruff Construction. And the other method, or like CM as an agent, the owner has contractual relationships with each prime contractor. And even if you have a bond on your subcontractors, I mean, if you go after a bond, that's still going to be a legal process. It's going to be a whole thing. But under the CMAR, it's going to be us taking care of it and taking the liability of those subcontracts because we own all the risk. And that's the biggest thing here is the risk factor. We have to hit the budget, and then we have to own all of our subcontracts. And I think that's one of the biggest differentiators. Does that answer it more clearly?
And I think we're getting some hitting pay dirt. So in a situation where we're contracting with one entity that has subcontractors, if we have a dispute with the subcontractors' work, because we don't have a contract with them, we're suing the general contractor in order to get to the subs. Whereas if we have bid packages, we have a specific contract with, say, the concrete contractor, just to pick one randomly. And so if that were to happen, then we could bring a suit specifically against the sub for the performance of the work. So what I'm trying to tease out, this is actually a big deal for us. Not that this has actually happened, but theoretically, this is a big deal for us because we want to figure out how do we navigate disputes with subs. That's a question I have. And I'd love, if anyone else has comments on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I would offer that I think they're stating it correctly. In a CM agency model, you're right. You've got the contract directly with that concrete contractor, but it's like the Daytona 500, three laps before the end. If that happens, there's usually a big crash that catches a lot of people up in it. And so while you might have a dispute with a party, there would be some other related parties that would probably get drug into any dispute that the city would bring against somebody. So it's not usually just a one and done. But that approach, you can be more surgical as opposed to going through a GC or a CMAR. You have to reach through that GC or CMAR to get to somebody.
And that's my frustration is I would hope that our ability to pressure the general to get this right would then allow the general to put pressure on the sub. But that hasn't always happened with us. And so I am interested in ways to minimize our risk exposure when subs don't perform. I think that's as concisely as I can say that. And so any other comments on that?
I don't know that any method is gonna sidestep what you're talking about, because at any rate, you're probably going after a bond, putting pressure on someone, they're putting downward pressure. I think in any method, Mike, I don't know if, like what you said, and everyone's going to subrogate back, right? I have this portion, it goes to the insurance companies and everyone kind of takes their lumps. I think the biggest differentiator is getting in the different methods is qualifying the subcontractors to try and be more proactive than reactive of, hey, now we have an issue. So trying to get those parameters set when the CMAR is establishing what are the rules of engagement to get qualified, to make sure that you have the right people that are giving you numbers. I think that, I guess I would offer a more proactive approach than, hey, when we do have issues, because when you get to issues, I think you're still going to face similar resolution.
But Brian, so let me come back to Brian on this. So when we let out a bid, let's just say for concrete work, it's not just a matter of the low bid. We're also looking at the qualifications of the bidder. So I'm not so sure it's completely about the numbers. If we had a complex concrete project.
In which style of contracting? You're talking about design, bid, build?
No. If we're letting out a bid, so we have, like, say 11 bid packages and one of them is for the concrete. Okay. We're not limited to just taking the low bidder. We can also see, has this contractor done similar projects in the past? So we're doing some of that, aren't we, Brian?
It's going to depend on what the contract is for. So if it's for a non-utility project, let's say, then the contract is awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. So responsive, they've provided a bid that responds to the work that we have specified, and responsibility is determined by the city council at the time that the bid is awarded. So the council can utilize some tools at that time to determine, know that we have experience with this contractor and they failed to perform the work. We're moving on to the next lowest responsible bidder. In certain utility projects, we have the ability to award a bid in the best interest of the utility, which means that we do utilize the low bid, but we have the ability, we start with the low bid, but we have the ability to incorporate experience with certain, with the type of work that we are asking to be performed. So for example, we dealt with this on the ash pond encapsulation project. That was very specialized work, and some of the low bidders did not have previous experience with handling ash, and we ultimately awarded the contract to, I think it was the third lowest bidder.
I think you have to be very careful in terms of assuming that, well, if this person has a bad reputation, then you can go ahead and just move on. I mean, there's a lot of laws that protect the bidding process. people are very sensitive to getting rolled or rejected,
Right.
because it could be slanderous or it could affect their reputation from the bidding standpoint. I'm just coming from a few years of professional
Right.
experience as well too, and it sounds great in theory. I've rarely seen it done successfully where you have someone. Now, there's a case in our situation. We could probably justifiably say, no, you're not going to be, bidding on some work. And actually, it did happen here, recently.
So I have one last question, and I want to give council opportunity. I've eaten a lot of the oxygen here.
But just let's not presume that one delivery method is going to allow you to go ahead and do it. Now, with that said, under any of these delivery methods, typically the owner has a right to review all the subcontractors, and if they have an objection to one of them, they can go ahead and file that objection. You got to pay to buy up to the next, bid even. But the point is, even that you could have difficulty. You have to get an attorney involved. You have to get Karen needs to get, Karen's back there probably going, her head's probably going, crazy. But the point is, we have to be very careful. But in theory, yes, but in practicality, it's challenging.
So I'm just going to ask one more follow-up question. I want to give other council members a chance. One of my goals was to leave tonight with an understanding of, are there pros and cons to different methods? I'm going to go back to change orders. So which of these methods, and maybe there isn't a single one, but could you speak to specifically to the issue of which method would decrease a city's vulnerability to abuse of change orders?
I would say either CMR or CMA, because you have a set of pre-construction services that are an investment in prevention, where under a design bid build scenario with an owner's rep, there's not that set of services that's there to help you prevent it.
And so, Mike, is one of the checks on that, something you said in your presentation was helpful, that if you're involved in the beginning of the process, let's say we send out specs and there's some ambiguity. And so the contractor's like, what do I do with that? And so, well, I'm going to bid to the lowest number and still make that a responsive bid. Brian will be happy, but there's some ambiguity. And if we get into this, I can always submit a change order. So does the CMA model help us to have more accurate specs that we send out as a check on that kind of what I call abusive change orders?
Yeah, I would say both CMA and CMR do that, because you've got a conspirator from the industry along with the design team, along with you as a city, trying to create clarity out of ambiguity. And a city and a designer, without the contractor knowing the current circumstances in the market, is more at risk for not doing as good a job of that than with a CM at the table with you, either agent or R.
And to build on Mike's, I want to point out from a contractor standpoint, the two, we'll just put these in one bucket and then design bid build. Design bid build, your goal is to get the very lowest you can be and still get the job done. I mean, that's your goal. You're not trying to build a relationship with the owner necessarily. Whereas the other methods, you get on day one, you want to build a relationship, you want to find all the things, but on bid day, you know this painter's not qualified. You really need the work. I'm going to take on the lowest bid because I really need the work. Those are the risks that are being played by general contractors. And then they're looking for those things because they know that they didn't have the most qualified people. So I think it's a relationship thing too. You're getting on early, you're creating that relationship similar to you have with your architects, and you're trying to find the things that might spoil that. And it kind of reverses the mindset. It was like, you gave the interview thing. Would you ask?
Oh, yeah. So if you were going to hire somebody to your city staff, would you advertise for that? Would you advertise for that position, saying that whoever submits the lowest salary number in an envelope gets the job without any interview or qualifications? So it seems a little strange that we would use that type of methodology for very large and important projects. But there is a time and place for the design bid build process.
So that's the method we're using at Ames wastewater, and that has been a very successful project. And
Yep.
but
There are definitely some actors out there that exploit the system. They're banking on Iowans to be Iowa nice and avoid confrontation and just accept a change order. We don't like to do business that way. I've not experienced that with Story or De Novo in my previous experiences either. So, but there are those actors out there that exploit the change order system.
Yeah, thanks for that. We feel that on this side.
One thing I want to clarify too is there's really 4 delivery methods we're talking about tonight. A standard design bid build, then you have a design bid build with an owner's rep, and then CMA and CMAR. So in our role as an owner's rep, we do a similar CMA model where we do help in the early design, and we'll help vet contractors and get your project out there. So in a project that's, we'll call it 90% designed, we will go through and help clarify and documents and have a better understanding. So that way, when they do go out to bid, we're helping eliminate some of the risk that you have.
Yeah, thanks for those. I'll let council.
Other questions?
I have a follow-up to Tim's, just to clarify, given what the mayor was saying about the qualifications issue. So is it possible for a CMAR to actually disqualify somebody? And if so, we, in the time that several of us have been on council, have seen a couple of occasions where we wanted to disqualify someone in the future, and we have not done it because of the limitations on what we're able to do.
Sure. So I'll use the anecdotal example of Boys and Girls Club addition renovation project. We had, I think, 58 subcontractors submit qualifications for that project. We disqualified 3. We do that disqualification privately. We don't want to drag anybody's name through the mud or slander them, so we do that privately. But we list and it's by state law that you have to tell them what is the objective criteria that you did not meet. We had one contractor who we've worked with for years and years, and they did not have a license to contract in the state of Iowa. We're like, hey guys, what the heck? You don't have a contract license? They said, yeah, I've been meaning to do that paperwork. It's a $15 check that I didn't send in time. We'll catch you on the next one. We also had a small mom and pop finish contractor that submitted on the finishes package, not realizing that package was 3 times the scope of work that they had completed in any given year over the past 5 years. So they were over their skis. They didn't know it when they submitted their qualifications, so we let them know this project is too large for you. You're more than welcome to submit your number as a subcontractor to one of the qualified subcontractors if you'd like to perform parts of that work, but you just can't have the whole package. The last one, it was actually more of what couldn't we disqualify this contractor on. They had crimes committed by the CEO of the firm. There was safety factors. Their EMR rating was very high. They had OSHA violations. Just there was a number of issues, and we listed all of them. And so the three disqualified out of 58, and they're all for objective reasons. There's none in there that were disqualified because we just didn't like working with them on the last project. And then the other standard that I think all CMs are, as we're navigating this process, is if you disqualify somebody for, say, their EMR rating isn't good enough, you need to disqualify all contractors that don't meet that standard. So you don't get to pick and choose who can be qualified for one objective criteria and who can. So
Do you have any examples of that on public work? That's a private project.
yeah, so did use some public funds. So we used the public.
I mean, a
CMAR.
publicly owned. That's not. Publicly
So yes, Webster City wastewater treatment plant. We just got done through early bid package qualifications, and we did disqualify a couple of electrical contractors because of scope of work and safety ratings, as well as a few suppliers who were not qualified to supply the project. So,
and there was no objections filed. Or,
there's definitely some grumpy subcontractors,
No, I
but
mean, in
no,
terms of
nothing
there's
legal.
no official that they started appealing that from the standpoint.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that, we're doing water treatment plants in Altoona and Bondurant as a CM. And so Woodruff bids our work and we bid Woodruff's work. So we're all playing on sort of different sides of this. I'm unaware that we had any subs that were disqualified through that qualification process. But two things to note, I think. One is not all qualification processes are created equally. Some are pretty simple and straightforward, and some are so onerous and rigorous that you wouldn't want to put your worst enemy through having to go through it. And that really limits then the people that show up and participate for you. And then secondly, I would say, John, to your point, there's no CMAR police. This statute's been in place for less than 4 years, and really nobody has disputed meaningfully a rejection from being qualified or disputed how it's gone. At some point, something's going to come up. It just hasn't. It hasn't come up yet. And so I would say for a fire station project, for example, it would be hard to pre-disqualify parties to do that. It's a pretty routine use, probably pretty routine materials, so on and so forth. For a new power plant, there can be an elevated level of criteria for qualified, unqualified that would probably parse the field more.
Other questions, Gloria?
Yeah. One of the notes on Mike's slides had to do with the CMAR bids, which sounds like public bids have undisclosed amounts. Did I get that right? And you disclose the amounts of the bids that are made?
Yes,
for-
it's one of the distinctions. So in a construction manager as an agent, the way that it's done is if there are 4 electrical bids that are delivered by 2:00 on a prescribed day, those bids are acknowledged, they're reviewed for conformity, and then they're read aloud, what the numbers and the values are of them. In a construction manager at risk scenario, those same bids are turned in at 2:00 that day and they're acknowledged. Yep, we got a bid from X, Y, and Z electricians, and then we take them and we sit with you as a city and the design team, and we open and evaluate them together. And then go through the vetting process as Art described to be able to determine scope completeness, best value, et cetera. You're hard pressed not to pick who the low person is, but there's time to be able to thoughtfully evaluate that in a CMAR process.
Well, that's the
So-
same on design bid build too.
Singularly, with that GC, they may or may not disclose and give you access to all of the subs and suppliers, but with the GC.
If you're getting one price from the general contractor on bid days, the
Yep.
point is you have no idea what was going on in the
Correct.
background.
So I'm just trying to understand how that squares with transparency, because one of the quotes from the Director of Planning and Engineering from the Des Moines Airport was that the CMAR is the most transparent and most predictable. I get the most predictable part, but it doesn't seem like this is a very transparent process if you aren't disclosing those bid components or...
So there is I'll say an obligation. So once you bid a project and you determine all the awardees and a GMP is set, then there is an obligation to disclose the bids, who showed up, and how it shook out.
And that's an option. We, in our CMAR, we open bids publicly like we do with CMA. So you have the option to do that in a CMAR. You don't have to.
Okay. I think that's it for now. I know I had another one, but I can't remember what
Okay.
it was.
Other questions?
I just had one about the timing of projects, and if a project goes over schedule. I only want, so with the CMAR, I heard guaranteed maximum price. Does that include, something going awry and taking longer than we plan? And I guess, so then my other question is, does that mean that's not true of these other methods?
So GMP is the shorthand for guaranteed maximum price, but that GMP also includes the stated substantial completion date that the contractor, the construction manager at risk, is saying, I will also guarantee that will be done by this date. Again, it's tied to that contractor is the one who wrote the schedule and created the schedule. They're not just signing up for a schedule that they didn't have a hand in creating, like a design bid build project.
They wouldn't get paid more than that guarantee.
Correct.
GMP. If it doesn't happen by the date, what's the penalty?
It's whatever you write into the contract. If there are liquidated damages on a per day basis, then those
What's a
would be-
typical penalty, I guess?
They really are all different.
The range is typically, the low end would be a really small one, like $200 a day. I think the one that we're doing, the hard bid project for the city right now, is $3,500 a day after substantial, I think, somewhere around there.
Okay.
That's a $53 million project, so.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I would offer on those damages, it's probably 95% of contracts don't have any form of damages, no liquidated damages. They're not meant to be punitive. They're meant to be some sort of cost recovery for harm that is encountered by not having the benefit of something. So like at the wastewater plant, if they're not ready and you can't treat water and you need to hire somebody else to treat that water, that's a damage. If it's student residence and kids come in August, they don't come in November, that's some damage. But a fire station or a this or that, very often it's hard to tie the consequence of something being harm and apply a monetary value to it.
Correct
So-
me if I'm wrong, guys, too. On CMA, it can be really difficult to determine who's at fault for the schedule overage as well. So at least all the CMA projects I've ever been involved in, there typically was not liquidated damages because of that fact.
I'll say that's part of it. Damages are hard to apply to multiple contracts. Secondly, it's really the sum of the low bidders that show up in a CMA agency scenario. So you play the hand you're dealt. And the CM needs to play that hand as well as they can play it. And sometimes it delivers ahead of time, sometimes it delivers on time, and sometimes it delivers after time. But it's the consequence of that contracting and how it goes, it induces more variability into that scenario.
And so the guaranteed maximum price is only in the CMAR
Right.
method, not in,
And I'll say design bid build.
and design bid build. Okay.
That's implied. It's a lump sum, which is one form of guaranteed maximum price.
Sure.
So I'll say it's the same thing, only different.
Thank you. Okay.
And to Art's point, like you said, we're delivering two things with the GMP. We're delivering a price and then also a schedule that we've helped create and had a hand in. And we have that risk. Again, that's the biggest differentiator because the CMS agent, typically if it goes over and they don't hit a date, not only do you not get money back, you're actually typically going to pay more to that because there's more costs that they've incurred that. So that is a big difference.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Mine is more on the other end, and maybe it's the same for all, but in your interactions with the architects, with the designers, occasionally there have been issues that something was in the drawings and then it's discovered later that, oh, wait, we didn't do it according to that. And so what's your interaction? And I don't know if there's any difference between these different models with the designers.
Yeah, I think all three of these roles is truly trying to be your advocate and your partner in this process. Most of the scenarios that I think that you're experiencing with that is with just a true design bid build, and that person is now on their side of the table and not yours. So they're trying to protect themselves versus your side.
Actually, it's on multiple delivery methods. It's not just design, bid, build. This is happening.
Yeah, I would say design teams still have jobs to do. They still need to create good, productive documents, and we are all here to help them do that. But they're not perfect, and so to the extent that the imperfect shows up, it may or may not show up at the council table to figure out how to remedy that. And some architects and engineers, they're all over it. Man, give me a partner, give me some help. And some of them would stiff arm it like the plague. Do not engage with anybody during the design phase. I'll give you the drawings when I'm done. And that, so even the nature of who the team is and how they interact will impact the value offered through any of the different delivery methods.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Do you remember yours?
Yes, I remember what it was. And this maybe is a question for Brian. And it's actually related to the Iowa Code, Chapter 26A. So we'll see how much you know about this. Maybe these guys know more about it than you do.
I have it saved as a bookmark on my browser,
Okay,
so
there we go.
should be able to help you.
Well, so I'm going to test your knowledge. 26A.4 prohibited contracts refers to a governmental entity shall not be authorized to enter into a design build contract for the construction of a public improvement. Now, I looked at the public improvement definition, and I don't understand how we could ever use design build given the definition of public improvement.
Yeah, so another little piece of background. When they passed the law allowing CMAR in 2022, the legislature took design build off the table as a delivery method. We did have kind of a
Board of Regents had.
Yeah, Board of Regents projects could use design build and design build bridging, but when they enacted CMAR, they took that off the table. So that's why that provision is in there.
I mean, why don't you explain what design build is compared to what?
So design build is where you have one entity who is responsible for both the design and the construction. So some of the previous issue where you talked about where you're playing marriage counselor between the design team and the contracting team goes away in a design build scenario where you're hiring one team to provide both design and construction. It's a very popular delivery method outside of the state of Iowa, especially like federal highway projects and interstate projects. We use it a lot on the private side as well. Story's got an in-house design build team as well.
So we did design build delivery for the Turkleton Engineering Building at Iowa State that was publicly permitted, and the Jardine Building there at Iowa State, the addition. So those were in play, and as Art indicated, when the legislation passed, so you can imagine it was a grand bargain of sausage making with all the constituent parties to stake their claim. And one of them was for public improvement, specifically on the horizontal side. The road builders did not want any of this to be impacting anything. So probably 26.4.2 is, yeah, this is not going to apply to roads or horizontal infrastructure in any way whatsoever.
Thank you very much for that explanation, because I just could not get my mind around it. Makes sense now, sort of.
Other questions? Art, your case study stated that for design bid build, there's a 33% schedule growth and under CMAR, it's a scheduled decrease. I'm curious, what's that measured from, and who sets the schedule? Because
Yep,
the point is,
so-
it all depends upon how it's being set.
Yep. So each one of those projects is probably an individual use case. But for instance, in the design bid build one, maybe the owner went out and talked to an architect, said, "Hey, I want to design a project, and our goal is to have it open by July of 2028." Well, and then when that project finally completed, it might have been June of 2029. And so that was the schedule increase. But from the first step to the last step, where do we want to be, on day one versus where it ended up? And again, I don't think it's so much that you're going to finish the project faster using CMAR. It's just that one.
Well, I guess that's my point, is that if, for example, a manufacturing plant had a hard completion date because they had to fulfill orders for some, I'm just hypothetical. So it's not that the design bid build is going to take a third longer,
Correct.
and you're going
Right.
to save 8% of time.
Yeah.
Because those percentages could be misleading. That all of a sudden gives the idea, well, if you do CMAR, we're going to get this job done for you way faster than a design bid build.
Yep. Back to Brian Bell's point, it's transparency and predictability over just strict cost and schedule. Realistic expectations set up front.
So in your linear graph, you showed on the bottom that in your scenario, in CMAR, that there's one change order at the end, and it potentially is a deduct.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing, to Tim's point, and council's aware, there are multiple change orders that occur during a project. Help council understand, how much money do you put into contingencies and allowances to build up this kitty to allow their money to be put back? And how do we know, how does council know? How do we know that's being adjudicated appropriately? And I have a follow-up question after you answer that.
Sure. So when you submit, when the CMAR submits their guaranteed maximum price proposal, it will have the allowances and contingencies very clearly delineated. Typically, we don't like to see those go more than 4 to 5%. That's just a lot of blue sky in the project. Project still has to come under budget. Like I said, we don't like those to get north of 4 or 5%, kind of a realistic expectation for contingencies and allowances. Then as those contingencies and allowances are drawn down throughout the project, that's where the open book accounting comes in, where the actual receipts, actual invoices, actual logs of labor and days, hourly logs indicate we used contingency for this, it costs this much, we drew it down. Then once that contingency or allowance is exhausted, then you either have to go back to the owner, come back to the well. Nobody likes to do that, or you just eat the cost. So that's how that's drawn down. Typically, we're seeing 1 to 2% of those allowances contingency is given back at the end. So approximately half of what you were, a quarter to half of what you had anticipated for contingency allowances is coming back to the owner.
And we've treated those too as no cost change order. So we actually have a formal contract change order that says, here's what the money came out of, here's what it's going into, total cost change 0. Just further transparency. I don't believe the way the law is written, you absolutely would have to do that. I'm sure all of them don't, but that's just one thing that we've done to give that level of transparency. So on a weekly, monthly basis, these are what we've used, this is what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And there are, in the A133 contract with the CMAR, there's standard language in it where there can be cost saving sharing if that's something the city wants to entertain, where you say, if we've got $100,000 of allowances or contingencies set aside, If we don't use any of that, then a certain percentage would go to the CM and the rest would go to the owner, incentivizing finding savings on a project. So there are provisions. We haven't used any to date. Most public entities have wanted to receive all of their contingency and allowance back at the end. We've seen on the we've seen on the private side actually is where private entities are very interested in incentivizing the CM to find savings on a project. So they're more willing to.
Well, I would always encourage that provision. Actually, we had an owner that initially thinking, why wouldn't the owner want it all back? It's their money. And she said, because you have no incentive. You have a GMAX based on this percent. So you want to spend every dime if you're not getting any back. I want to give you double what you would have got to give me savings. So think about it in that aspect too, because I always thought the same thing too. Why wouldn't the owner want it all back? Well, if your contractor has the best interest to make double the money and save you money, and they're still only getting just, maybe their fee percentage was 3 and they're getting 6 on savings, that's still significant.
So what role does an owner play in approving change orders then?
So
For which method that's similar?
Yep. So you would dictate in the A133 what the method of change order is. If the city wants more involvement, like that they want to approve the use of allowances and contingencies before it is drawn down, you would write that into the contract. Most are that I've seen have been very trusting that they've already gone through the process of qualifications and proposals and procurement of their CMAR. It's a relationship built on trust. So they allow us to draw those funds down without having to go through a change order process for drawing down an allowance or a contingency.
But what if there's a disputable situation where the owner feels that it's really, that something was built or done that really was not communicated, and change order is issued and all of a sudden council wouldn't agree with it, or if we believe that the change order is really due to an error on the design professional and is all ahead and approved and moves forward. See what I'm saying? I mean, the point is you're all of you are acutely aware, construction projects are incredibly complex and there's lots of moving parts and pieces to it. And we're just speaking from experience here from the dais of things that have occurred that are incredibly frustrating. I think it's behind some of the conversation that we're trying to tease out. It seems like those that we represent are the ones that are paying the freight a lot of times. And so I'm just trying to understand, we're trying to get down to the point of how can, we be treated fairly and justifiably, essentially. And I'm not saying that people are not trying to do that, but it's just we're trying to understand. And that's why, I think to Gloria's point, and I was a little, I had the same question about being most transparent when it sounds like what was being described, at least. Maybe it's done differently. It didn't seem.
John has really hit on the head the frustration I feel when we're presented with a change order. I don't know what I'm supposed to do up here from a due diligence perspective. Am I going to go out to the job site? Am I going to bring in a third party to say, help me evaluate the validity of this change order? And so, and the contractors understand the dynamic that it's not an even playing field. So my hope is that our partner, a CM or one of these different players, will be an advocate for us to help smoke out and say, frankly, that's bogus. Can we just call it what it is? Let's not do this anymore. And I would love that, but I haven't seen that.
Right.
I would say that you probably don't see it because it happens before something gets here. So a couple of things. In a design bid build scenario, you're greeted with whatever it is, and then you need to deal with it, and your architect is sort of your arbiter. In any of these delivery methods, nobody ever gets credit for what they prevent getting
So that's fair.
getting to your table. And so there's a lot that gets, I'll say, litigated outside of council chambers. And man, that's really the goal. Yeah. The other part of any of these delivery methods is an owner needs to have a stomach for it. So you have a degree of visibility and transparency, and you can figure out how you want to do that. Do you want to beat somebody with it, or do you want to appreciate it and then work through it? And so I say an owner needs to have a stomach for another level of detail, because it's not always pretty, and sometimes it's clumsy. But that's true with an owner's rep, CMAR or CMA. You do have a degree of visibility. Can you make peace with that, or would you just rather not know?
And so this is extremely helpful, Mike. So sometimes the change orders come in and they're a relatively modest amount, and we've got a full agenda. We just don't have the bandwidth to do a deep dive on that. And so I appreciate the fact that you sort of pregame some of those change orders, but it's helpful in the relationship to know that you have vetted the change order and you said, we kicked the tires on this. We think this is legitimate. It's just really hard for us to wrap our brain around when we should fight on this. And then it just becomes a rubber stamp, because we approved the prior 7 of them. How can we turn this one down? It's just one more. And I just feel like we're bleeding.
If your professional services have done the job that you've hired them to do, and if your staff has done the job that you've hired them to do, by the time it gets to you, it should be a formality. It really should. I served on the school board for 6 years. I approved a lot of change orders, and I've seen a lot of game film, and I could have gone deep on about any of them, but I trusted that process. And if I had some questions, I could ask outside of it. But making a production out of it here is not really in the city's interest or in anybody's interest.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
I don't want this to be the venue. No
Yeah.
question for that kind of dialogue. This isn't the setting for that. It should be done before it gets to the dais.
Yep.
Yeah, well said.
So could I ask a question of Steve and Brian?
Sure.
This one, it's not about the code, I swear. One of the projects that we haven't talked about was the Ames Library project, which is the one that we used a representative construction advisor on.
Correct.
Was that project, did it come in at budget? I don't remember. Did it come in a timely way?
Well, you're asking me to remember.
I don't know. That's what I'm
do
saying.
remember
Brian
there
might remember. I
There were
don't
some
know.
problems with windows and things like that. There were some disputes on windows. Remember, we were trying to meld an older building with a newer building. But overall, I can tell you in retrospect, I think the staff was very satisfied with the help we received for that and advisor, and we're going to use that in certain situations. So yes, I think overall, I can't tell you exactly we come in 5% below or whatever. I know there were some disputes that were resolved, and we felt that the person handling it did a very good job. That was Brad Heedstrom, I remember, did that for us. And we're going to use someone right now. We're going to use you all, I think, for our project too. We think it's worthwhile in certain situations. We've tried them all. I guess what we've learned is that you could talk about the strengths of all the models, but it's not the models itself. It's the dedication of the design team, right? The contractor. And whether you hire any one of these different models, dedication to the quality of the workmanship, holding people accountable, that's what it's going to make success. You can pick any model you want. If you got the wrong people in the position, you're going to go with a project you're not going to be happy with. And that's what we have to team up with. These are all good companies, so I'm not saying that. I just think it takes all three. It's a design, it's a contractor, and these people. It can't rely on the model itself. It adds some benefits in certain situations, but it's more than that.
Yeah, no model is a magic bullet to make this. Design and construction is not for the faint of heart. You know, we're designing and building multi-million-dollar prototypes that have never been built this same way before, with teams that have never been assembled in this particular way before, and choreographing the gradual exchange of labor and materials over time, through a schedule. It's a complex process. And if you can keep the change orders down to, 2-3% on a project, and they're, reasonable, then I don't know what more you can ask for, right?
So Art, you made a presentation to our staff advocating for CMR on the phase 2. talk to us about what you believe have been done differently, or what the benefits of having a CMR would have been versus design bid build on phase one.
Of which project?
The one that you're working on right now, the wastewater treatment plant. That was design bid build. It came in over budget.
Yep. So
And,
remind me, Grant,
You have to pay for this one.
the big overage was on the electrical side.
Yeah, the electrical side.
What piece specifically was that? Do you remember?
Yeah, just electrical in general right now has gone up so much. Semiconductors, all those things have just, with all the AI and all the data centers, they've all just lead times of this, and you can't pay enough to get it earlier because Facebook and Google have more money than anyone else. What could we have done differently? I think working with the design team, actually after the fact, we are very collaborative. We actually did come up. I think that project, we are still net credit change orders at this point. So on the onset, we went in with the mentality of being a advocate for the city and hey, here's what we can do. It would have been just like we talked earlier. I don't know specifically. I'm not the project manager. I'm a regional president, so I don't know specifically like what those things would have been. But just working collaboratively with Strand, who's a great partner, and coming up with those things throughout the process. So
Yeah.
it would have been.
Yeah, I would say we probably would have bid out the electrical scopes earlier than the rest of the scopes, knowing that that is where a lot of the long lead time items are and where a lot of the cost of a project like that is.
And that's what we've
And
been
that
doing
would've-
on like Webster City, for example. We're picking the things that have the most variability, the most volatility, and we're getting those out front and saying, let's bid those now. Because a lot of these projects, I don't know when that project was supposed to bid originally, but other cities that were doing it, we hear from the engineer, oh, it's going to bid in a month, and it isn't until a year later, and prices have just gone up so much on some things that.
So what that would have done, it wouldn't have necessarily come in less expensive.
And that, to Art's point, yeah, we're not saying that CMAR is a cheaper option. We're saying we're going to set the expectations. What we did and what Art's doing at Webster City right now, we're doing 30, 60, or
30, 60, 90.
so as you're getting closer, you're knowing where those numbers are going to come in versus, you know, an engineer's taking a stab at it, and then it might sit on the shelf for 12 months. And then when it comes to date, it's like, well, we didn't have an update, and this really took us back.
Yeah. So if you bid the electrical pieces out earlier, you would have exposed where that overage was.
Right.
And maybe there's an opportunity to value engineer other components of the project to get it a little closer to budget. So that's one anecdotal example of how CMAR might have helped some regards on that project.
I said one more question, hard to believe, just one more question. And it's a hypothetical one. And that is, so quality control during construction, architect comes up once, twice a month, maybe. They come up for a project meeting, maybe there for an hour or two. Mechanical engineer might be there, once every other month, whatever. Can you just discuss under each of your different scenarios what roles you guys play in terms of review? I know you can't reject work, but our staff is not qualified to be out there looking things over. Just talk about Brandon, under your scenario, and then Mike and Art, how you approach that, what contractually your delivery method is. And I know design bid build is going to be on the architect essentially, or we have to hire a construction inspector essentially, to be out there, or a project representative.
Yeah, for our role, especially us as a construction firm, for quality control, I mean, we think of it if you were essentially building a house and you're representing yourself in that, and there's a nick in the drywall that you're not accepting. Our role is to go out there and check that and make sure that you're aware of that. So that way, when it comes time to pay your contractor, that's really our biggest tool we can use, is to say, hey, their work isn't as quality. We need to have a discussion on payment and talk about where they're truly at in the process of the project to help control that quality.
So you're finding that, or the owner has to find
that? Is what I'm doing for you. So my role would be to do, and it's all, I guess, project dependent. If the request is weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, then I'll go do a project site walk and create a report and provide that. And in that report is, here's what I found, here's the issues that need to be addressed, and here's the next step to address those issues.
So you have no one. So under your delivery method, there's no one on site full-time as a superintendent or an overseer or monitoring what's going on. Is that correct?
Not for us, but for your design bid build company, they would be their oversight. Yes.
I'm just trying to tease out, you're the advisor, construction advisor. So how frequently is a person in that capacity on site then?
Yeah, I would make, again, it depends on what the project is, but if you want me on site weekly, bi-weekly,
But it's not daily or every hour this work is going on?
it is not, no.
Okay, all right.
And by contrast, CM agency is that way. And then it's, so there are different kinds of CMs. There are CMs that are more focused administratively and maybe less in the field. And there are others that do both of that. So the partners you hire and how they staff the project will speak to somebody knowing what good looks like, having a good pre-installation meeting, having the first piece of work inspected, not just by the CM, but by probably the design team member and the owner, and setting a standard of what's acceptable. So there's the work within somebody's scope, and then there's the work between scopes. So there's a lot of time spent coordinating between scopes that would happen in a CMAR, design bid build, or CMA scenario. But very often the conflicts between one piece of work and the other are the source of wailing and gnashing of teeth. And so trying to identify that early and mitigating that as part of the role.
So I think I heard you say something that I hadn't heard before, and that is there's a variety of CMA delivery methods. Is that right? Or
No, there's, I'll say, a variety of different CM firms in the ways in which they go about it. Some are more administratively focused, and they've got team members that maybe haven't spent as much time in the field looking at work. And there are others that do GC work, CMR work, all the kinds of work, and they do CMA. And it's those same people that are routinely dealing inside of the work that are also on those projects.
Okay, so council's not doing the vetting. Karen Server is doing that vetting with a staff member. Speak to them and tell them, how do they find out what is being provided to try and make sure that they get what we need? Because we have an incredibly complex project, this new thermal energy project coming up with a gazillion miles of electric wiring and big engines and the whole 9 yards. I don't know that Curtis is going to be living out there with a sleeping bag, but the point is you may have to. The point is that that's the kind of help that we need. And the pool is another example in terms of the complexity of what's going on. Yep. So how do you tease that out or parse that out so that our expectation, or city's expectations are met?
Yeah. So I was gonna, I have a big close, and because I think ultimately these methods are just that, they're just methods, and every public official, to include me and you, wants to have sort of the paint by numbers approach to be able to figure out which one applies. And I think my big revelation is it's about the circumstances. Mm-hmm. And it's really about your circumstances of a project at the time. It's about the market level of busyness. It's about who might be attracted to this. It's about your staff capability to already have a day job and then do this day job, have another one or not. It's about the length of time it takes, the speed it takes, complexity. It's all very circumstantial. And then to your point, John, about what sort of a partner do we need? Because there are labels that go along with each of these delivery methods. And then there's even variability in the ways in which people provide service inside of those labels. And so the most important things you will do, and if I had a mic, I won't kick this, I won't drop it, but what we've seen in the CMAR world, as well as the CMA world, is having the people that you have vetting and scoring, knowing what good looks like, and then having a scoring methodology that matches up with your needs and circumstances. We've seen a lot of I'll say, elected officials weigh in on scoring when they've not built a power plant before or a fire station before or something. And while that means well, a lot of the staff sort of fades to black, and it becomes a decision informed by people that mean well, but they don't know what good looks like there. So having team members from the city know what good looks like and overvalue their and your design team members' contributions to that scoring to satisfy your circumstances, I think is the big thing. If you were to ask me, what have we seen in all the game film that's not working? It's retreaded RFPs and scorers and scoring that are not really consistent with project goals.
Art, how about quality control on site?
So with design bid building and construction manager at risk, if there's a subcontractor that's having issues with quality on site, that's going to reflect negatively on you as the CMAR or the GC. You're essentially in default of your contract if you're allowing that quality to not be met, not meet the specifications. So there's a lot of mitigating those issues, not in a progress meeting with the owner present. It's happening daily on site between our superintendent and the subcontractors. Grant, you want to add anything?
Yeah, what I'd say is it's not going to look different for Woodruff Construction on any of these methods. We treat quality the same. We have quality control managers. I mean, out at Ames right now, we've got, we do pre-punch lists when we turned over the admin building, went through there before the architect did. We want to have as clean of a architect, because the architect's still ultimately on all these methods, still going to be looking at punching it out. So we get in there and do a pre-punch, put it on Procore, have the subs assigned, and then they check those off. So I would say for us, it's not going to change on any method. That's how we approach all of our projects for our benefit and the owner's benefit. So I don't know if there's anything special on our delivery method that we would do differently.
So similar to CMA, you're going to have a full-time superintendent.
Yes, yeah.
Is that correct? And they're going to be on the eyes and ears on the site. Is that right?
Correct. And then there's testing agencies for,
Right.
civil and structural things and all those. Yeah. Yep.
So, John, this question is very helpful for me. So if you're a subcontractor, we've been focusing tonight on your roles. I want to just take a second and look at this from the perspective of the subs. So if you're an electrical engineer, you're mechanical, from their perspective, could you speak to the pros and cons? Because this is a different relationship depending on which of these. Could you just give us your take from the subcontractor's perspective? That would be helpful for us to know.
Sure. So on the CMAR side of things, we definitely have noticed that some pushback in our Northwest region. We have an office in Spencer. It's a very rural office. The subcontractors up there are not used to this qualifications-based process, and they're not particularly excited about having to do these extra steps.
Are you talking more specifically about design?
No.
Or you do mean, okay.
Yep. So and let me be specific, if I'm going to bid a project, and this is really helpful for us because the subs are doing the work heavily. And so are the subs going to bid differently depending on which of the models is being used? Because their relationship in this is going to be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does that change? And maybe it doesn't, but I would like to get your take on, does the game change because the rules for the sub are going to be different? If I'm a sub and I'm going to be bidding your approach versus your approach versus your approach, how does that change the game for me?
I would say for the CM at risk, it feels very similar. Like I said, we did the Boys and Girls Club here in town. Once you get into contract for the subcontractors, it feels like it's a lump sum bid. Well, it is for them. So, I mean, for them, the rules of engagement, really what changes is you disqualify the unqualified contractors. So you kind of weed some out. But throughout the contracts, like I said about the punch list, we would have done that anyway. A lot of the things remain the same. It's just a paperwork thing. I don't know from Story's perspective. I mean, I think it's very much subs treated the same way. You just weed out some of the ones that would have given you a quote that never would have got qualified.
I would say from a method perspective, there's some variability. I'll say who's leading the method is your primary variability. In other words, if it's a CMAR that the market subcontractors don't like as well and or think is more onerous in their dealings, they won't show up. If it's a CMAR that they know and they respect and that they want to work with, they'll show up. In CM agency, one thing that subcontractors prefer is getting paid directly from an owner, as opposed to having it run through a GC or a CM. CMAR, I don't know of this happening, but there are stories about games that get played by general contractors that withhold payment to subs for 60, 90, 120 days, and there's really no recourse, especially on public projects, because you can't file liens, where the payment streams are super clean right to subcontractors. So many of them, I'll say, prefer that part of CM agency. But the methods have some nuance and variability, but who you pick as your quarterback is the biggest variability for people to want to show up or not show up.
Well, this is important because we've had projects where we just have had very few contractors who have submitted bids. And so we're sort of stuck. And so if there are factors that would influence who is going to show up and submit a bid, that's an important factor for us.
So,
Brian, did you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, just that. So under a traditional design bid build, for example, the entity that we have the ability to hold responsible is the general contractor, right? So if the general contractor has problems with their subs, that's not really our problem as the owner. That's the general contractor's problem to get sorted out and to deliver the project. Whereas in a CMA approach, let's say, if we have a problem with a non-performing or non-responsive subcontractor, I mean, we have that contractual relationship. We don't have the GC either absorbing that risk or holding that contractor accountable. We're the ones that have to do that. We're the ones that have that risk.
So from the contractor's perspective, this is exactly what I'm trying to tease out, Brian. So our incentive is to get as many qualified contractors as we can. We get a better project with more people applying. My question is, if we have two projects, one that's a general contractor and one is some variation of what are these, does that change, do you think, the applicants or the bids? I mean, maybe they say, I don't like that, so I'm gonna pad my bid higher because I've got some risk exposure with this method. I don't have a read on this. And so could you clarify that for me? Maybe there's not a difference between them.
I'll say this: we bid to CMs, like down Des Moines. We worked on the animal shelter down there. It was a really big Des Moines firm. I'm not going to mention it, but there's a factor that we call it. It's their factor because they're a pain. So yes, that happens, and there's things. So yeah, it happens. There's engineers, there's architects that we know that this is how they do business. This is, how they engage you, and so there can be that. And there's people that you work really well with that it's like, we'd love to do it. We'd bend over backwards because we've had such good. So that does happen. Yes.
But that's Mike's point.
Yeah, it's based on the people.
The delivery method.
It had to do with
the quarterback was.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay, thanks for that.
And Tim, to answer your question too on not having enough people bidding your job, part of that is what we do during a bidding process in any of these roles is we're calling qualified contractors to get them interested and excited about the project and hoping that they can ask questions early so that way their bids are true and complete.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Any closing questions? Well, on behalf of council, thank you guys for coming in. I think it was a good, robust conversation, helped us get a little more understanding.
So we hope you found it informative because you heard about these terms. Again, I think what we've learned is no one size fits all, and we're not asking for a recommendation to go any one way. It'll be, a recommendation from the city staff on the type of project we have, and we think what the type of assistance we need. We're trying to learn. We've now partaken, or we will partake in all the different opportunities and the 4 different approaches, and we'll learn more about them. But we'll come back through recommendations from the staff on which way we think is the most advantageous.
So to Mike's point, which I thought was your big closing or your mic drop, but the point was, I think it was well done, and that is, how are we going to go about making sure that our scoring and what the needs are align?
Well, Karen will make sure we do an internal. The good thing is
that's not. I mean, and only was not talking about Karen servers.
no. I think what he was trying to tell you is don't let the city council get involved in doing it, right? Let the professionals handle it. And fortunately, in this city,
I didn't hear that.
yeah, I heard him. And I think what you let our city staff do that, we'll make sure they're aligned. But there is another thing. I know sometimes council get upset with change orders, and it is an imperfect world, and you're going to have change orders, right? And you don't want to overdo it. But I think people bid because they want to know not only those people, but how the council responds to change orders and changes, right?
Mhm.
So we have to have a long-term relationship with the contractors too. So we don't like to approve them either, but mistakes are made, and sometimes you got to come forward and admit it and approve a change order too. So I think the contractors also look at the relationship with the city staff and the city council, not just the people who are delivering the advisory service too, and how we react to those things.
All right. Any closing comments from panel members? Otherwise, we're going to.
You know, I would throw one more thing into the evaluative mix. So we're working on a new water plant in Altoona, and there are really 3 components to that project: a new water plant, some wells, and a horizontal distribution system. And on that project, the only CMAR part of it is the plant. It's not applying to the water distribution system, nor is it applying to the wells per se. And so as you evaluate and look at projects, it doesn't need to be an all or nothing. There can be some elements and components that are more well suited and some others that are more well suited for something else. And so as you think about water and wastewater improvements or power plant improvements or something like that, there can be some. I don't want you to get too nuanced and too cute and trying to split the atom in a way in which it's never been split before, but to not think of it all as a one thing, but there might be some ways to separate it to get the best of everything.
Yep.
So it's an intriguing idea. Who takes the lead to determine where those handoffs occur? Is that the owner? Is that the design professional? Or how is that happening in Altoona?
Yeah, so that was discussed. In fact, the stories may be meaningful. So there were, that's the way it was initially set up. And as we were going through the design process, there were 2 Jordan wells for the project. And ultimately, through that process, we determined that one of them was in the construction limits of the water plant, and the other one was outside of it. And the city made the decision, hey, we want to put that well in your scope, because you would be best well suited to coordinate all of that inside of those limits. And so there was an initial theory, and then that theory got amended as design progressed, and that's just how it was. So it was determined to be in the best interest of the city by the city, the design team, and then us.
Talk for an hour on these different nuances, but we're not going to do that.
We're not.
Yes, but anyway, I mean, yeah. Very good. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one item on disposition of communications to council. There was a memo from staff regarding a data center being considered for the airport. And the question is council interested in placing it on a future agenda?
Has council all seen the email we got from Chuck Winkleblack as well, asking us to?
Pardon me?
We got an email from. We got a second email related to this topic too.
That's it.
Just about the alternative potential location as well.
Right. There's multiple. I think the point is that in general, talking about, Brian, why don't you wrote the memo. Why don't you go ahead and just clarify exactly what my understanding was it was specifically for site that's being considered.
I wrote parts of the memo. I'll correct that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're aware that the company is interested in a couple alternative locations. The letter that they specifically wrote to the council requested to engage in negotiations for property at the airport. And so if the council wants to proceed with a discussion about that prospect, then they would need to put it on a future agenda. There are a variety of different aspects that we would need to discuss: the leasing arrangements, the utility provisions, and the approvals from the FAA and so forth.
And when you say utility provisions, that includes everything: electricity, water.
Correct. It's
all-
primarily focused on the electric.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
excess facilities kind of
Mhm.
charges.
Okay. All right. So is there an interest in placing on a future agenda for discussion?
I have one just sort of threshold question.
Sure.
Steve. So if a business wants to come in and construct a particular business, and if they're in a zoning structure that allows them to do that, to what degree can we veto a particular business if we have concerns about that?
Well, I've asked Mark about that, so we'll have to have a legal opinion on that. But one thing, there'd be a substantial cost for excess facilities, which is in our tariff, I think, that the company would have to pay for. And it's whether they want to pay the cost. Different locations will cost more to serve and have some positive or negative aspects to it. So I know what you're saying. We have to look at how they can handle it.
We
Well, no,
believe
that's-
it's a utility provision issue rather
Yeah, it's
than a zoning
utilities more
issue.
than is
They would have the
land
right
use.
to construct it in a zone that allows it.
And I'm not sure the public understands that, and I'm not sure I understand it fully. So we have received, I don't know, council can clarify,
A lot.
25
15,
emails?
yeah.
That makes-
And so I think the public is very interested about the negative externalities associated with one of these facilities. But we as a council don't have any tools to say, well, we don't want this particular type of business in our community. If it's a legitimate business and it's in that, if they're willing to pay the freight. And so I think the community would be very interested in having an opportunity to share their concerns. I think this is a situation where this is going to happen at some point. And so I think we need to provide substantial space for public input on this. But I would be interested to know from a city perspective, do we have even any tools in our toolbox to even say no? And
You could through land use. You could change the land use policy, what's acceptable use or not.
So there are some municipalities and counties that are creating
I'm not-
moratoriums for building.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting you do that. You could have a temporary moratorium. You could also, not every use you can think of, Mark was reminding me, I don't think slaughterhouses are allowed any place in the city of Ames or our land use policy plan. So there are uses you could actually prohibit. I'm not advocating that. You're just asking me how you could do that.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not in a position tonight to
Well,
offer.
Irma, I think you need a letter from the city attorney to deal with this issue.
So if we were to ask staff for that memo, then how does that relate to the issue of, do we want to put this on the June 23rd agenda? Because that seems like a very quick turnaround for that kind of memo. And I don't think that we would get the depth that we might want.
Are you focusing just on the legal question on what is allowed and not allowed? The legal question, is that the only thing you need? Follow-up information?
Well, I think that seems like a multifaceted question, because what's allowed in
Or
what
can be allowed.
context, what
use.
state code,
Yeah.
the City of Ames, all of those things. I don't know that we then say, yes, we'd like to have that memo by next Tuesday so we could put this
Well,
agenda.
that should be by Friday. Yeah.
That
So we have a
seems,
Yeah, that would not be
Yeah.
possible. Yeah, right.
that seems like a very quick turnaround.
I agree.
I would move that we get a memo from
See,
Mark, from staff, regarding the how would we phrase it? The ability or the ability for the city to.
You could, under current laws, are you asking under the current laws, or where we stand, whether you can deny that use if it's in a proper zoning area, right?
Yes.
Or what can you change in the future to deny it, right? There may be some changes. Is that what you're
Yes.
asking for?
Yes.
I'm just trying to
That's
clarify.
what- That's what I'm asking for.
Both, I think.
But it's
Can't
focused
really-
just on that, right?
You have questions? You look,
No, I'm just listening to the motion.
okay. Well, right now it's kind of long.
So I would move that we get a memo from staff on the legal means of, we would have to limit the construction of data centers.
As a use, right?
That use, yes,
What we have now and what we could implement in the future, yeah.
yes. Is that clear enough?
Is there a
Does that get at what you were
second? Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Okay, go ahead. Tim?
No, I agree. This is new for us, and I want to hear both sides. This is a big deal, and communities are making these decisions differently, and I would want us to make our own independent decisions. So I don't know how I would vote on this, but I certainly know that the process needs to be robust for giving public input so we can make a thoughtful, independent decision.
So the motion is, how do you limit or eliminate it?
Can you
Can
and how do you do it?
Is that broad enough to say what are the options essentially available? Or
To
not?
limit it,
Well, I mean, just in
That's the-
general, I mean, in terms of what
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at.
I'm trying to get at is that,
Or maybe,
Probably different mechanisms, right? Like,
yeah,
to
Mhm.
Steve's point, of course we can do a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But there's probably different ways to
address the,
address concerns or address certain types of facilities versus other. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole host of
Mhm.
potential
and what if,
discussion items.
well, yeah, what, to Tim's point about discussion is that there may be some data centers may be different than other data centers. I'm not advocating for or against it, but the point is, let's get all the facts out and make sure we understand what we're talking about
Right.
before we go ahead and jump to conclusions.
That's right.
But anyway, there's the motion been made and seconded.
Can I ask?
Is there,
So just to be clear, that motion didn't indicate any time in particular for.
oh, there's
return.
nothing, that motion was just to get a memo. Had nothing to do with your memo yet.
It has nothing to do with the timing at which this would return to the
Not
city
yet, but
council.
that
No.
could be a forthcoming motion in the very near future.
Thank you.
All right, I want to say the motion, it's just for the memo. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
okay, so
Any
yeah,
opposed? Motion
So I
carried.
guess what does the timeline look like on that?
so let's make it clear. So you're not going to want to put the item to discussion until that memo is received? Is that what you're saying?
That would be my choice to
Well, I
not.
think you just got to ask as soon as possible. I'm not here to speak for Mark, you know.
Yeah.
He's
Oh,
been,
yeah,
he's been, not warned, he's been starting to think about it, let's say.
right.
I think Tim made a good point too about making sure it's a robust discussion. And so I wonder too, like this memo doesn't really help get started with the conversation with the public,
Not at
which
all,
I think
yeah.
is important. And so I'm wondering if council has an appetite to have like a listening session type workshop on the topic of data centers. Because I know that I can guess that the meeting we choose to put this on is going to be a really long meeting because there's a lot of people that want to speak to this topic. So I wonder if having a dedicated evening that's a listening session for people to come and talk to us about concerns that they have, if that might be worthwhile.
Well, and also those who might speak in favor
Right.
Right.
Sure.
of it.
Yeah, and but I do think it's important to get that dialogue with the public started so that it doesn't appear like we're trying to do something under the table or hurry something through or whatever the case may be. So I guess I would move that we schedule I'll call it a listening session workshop on this topic.
Yes,
We should have a special meeting.
special meeting.
A special meeting on this topic.
We can do it as soon as possible.
Moved and seconded. What is the timeline? Is this request from Light Edge, is there any kind of a indicated timeline on their part? I see a head
That-
nodding back there and behind your.
They're interested in moving forward sooner rather than later.
Can you give us some idea what they're talking about timeline?
Are you looking at me or somebody nodding?
I'm
behind?
looking at you, but I see someone back there with their head
I
nodding.
understand that they would like to move quickly.
Quickly
they're
defined as
interested.
equal into what?
1 week, 2 weeks.
1 week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months?
They
As soon as possible.
they would like to they were interested in having the discussion on the 23rd, subject to that being acceptable to the council. But of course, that's up to you.
So is there a downside for us to put this on an agenda just to have initial conversation with them to understand the scope of their project?
I mean, to Bronwyn's
The
point,
minute we
that's
do
fine. You
that-
better take everything else off the agenda then.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, I guess
The wall's gonna be
that's your call.
Special meeting, right?
No, if we did it on the 23rd.
23rd.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
so there's been motions made and
Go ahead.
seconded. Well, read the
Just-
motion
yeah,
again.
everything else off the agenda.
The motion as it stands right now is what?
Just consent items, right?
Mhm,
Okay.
with no date.
All right.
What do you
Can we
think?
defer to staff to talk about?
Huh?
a
We have a lot on the
timing?
23rd. We take everything else besides.
We always-
Well, no, let's have this discussion offline, okay?
And I said special meeting. It can't be I don't mean a regular meeting,
Mhm.
right? My motion was just for
Special
a
meeting,
special
just
meeting.
dedicated only to this alone.
Yep.
Yep.
Where we're not being asked to make decisions,
Decision.
rather
Okay.
accepting public feedback, giving people a chance to speak.
All right. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Now, I wonder if, I know it's premature, but there seems to be now maybe a conflict of 3 different options for location, whether if you proceed, I think we have to be prepared to give you some information on the differences, right? The pros and cons from the city standpoint.
Yes.
Now, I know that assumes we're moving ahead with it, but I don't want to wait. And you have your meeting and then ask us to go for another one. So maybe you'll ask us for a kind of a short summary of the differences in the 2 sites and the pros and cons, 3 sites, right? The 3 sites of the airport. So what I don't want to do is end up negotiating on 3 sites.
Right.
Eventually, you're going to have to tell us which one you want to go to.
Right.
So there's the airport site, there's the it's being rented by Ron McMillan, that site. And then I guess it's the Bailey site, which is the industrial site on Dane Road. And they have some differentials in costs for excess utility facilities and stuff. Do you want to know that now or wait later on? We'll be behind it. You know, it'll take longer than to give that information.
Don't we already know that from Brian's
Some
memo?
of that is.
Some of it.
You know, some of it. I
Yeah.
don't know if we could get better data or costs or something like that. I don't know. But if you understand the differences now, fine. You have enough to determine. But I hope you'll arrive at that so we can move quickly to negotiate one, not negotiate all 3. And by the way, I'll add, I know you want to talk about, but it doesn't have to be an all or nothing too. Let's say people were saying we're really concerned about water consumption. You can do that through a development agreement, you know, to deal with that. You know what I'm saying? We can have a way to deal with it. Not let them use a lot of water. They do air cooled, let's say. So that it's not even all or nothing whether you haven't.
I mean, there's a lot of things I'd like to discuss, but we can't do it here and now, right?
Mhm.
So we got to put it on something to talk about and listen to public input.
So do you want to talk about just as it relates to the site, or we have a special meeting just to talk about data centers and in general?
In general.
Okay, so that person doesn't come and talk about the site, meaning the group,
So given the fact that
right?
it says,
That's what I meant.
And it would be helpful, I think, not just to listen to people's concerns, but to also, if we could have someone from the staff provide us their best understanding of 2 variables that I've been hearing, water and utility bills. And so this is a bit of an black box for me. I don't understand how these things, so there's different allegations about the sky is falling or it's not falling. So I want to make an intelligent decision. So I don't know if the staff has the bandwidth
Sure we
help
do.
us think
Sure we do
through.
on the level you want. Now, it depends if you talk about, the one that's being proposed today is not the massive ones you hear before. So there are some that are coming in at 300 acres and using 800 megawatts, so do you want to talk about that in general, what it's going to affect, or you want to talk about the one before you, which is a rather smaller data center? It's a third-party data center. They're renting out space. So when I get you the information, is it based on the bigger?
On the one we're considering.
Yeah, the one we're considering then?
So let me,
But yes, we're prepared to give you at 20,000 foot level those issues.
That'd be helpful for us and the public.
so let me send this trial balloon up and try this. If on the 23rd, this was discussed, there's no public input, and just put the brakes on for a second, just to get the information on what this light edge is talking about. Council could ask questions, public can listen, they can, to be followed up by a special listening
I like this.
session
That's interesting.
to get feedback, but they're working from what this particular data center is being proposed.
Right.
And to your point, they could potentially go to another site in town, but we'll have more information from that. And I think has not most of the work been done already on that memo, that we can have that information.
Which memo are you referring to? The attorney's memo?
No. I'm talking about the one that
The one that's in the
Brian
packet.
sent out already that gives information. This is project specific. And we've got to look at calendars, but I'm looking at, if you said July 1st is a Wednesday, or June 30. I'm just trying to keep this thing moving because they're asking for a response, and it keeps the topic hot.
What?
And then we can go ahead, and that gives time for there to be information generated by a legal opinion that, or options that you can or can't do that Gloria that we already voted on. And that would be coming back potentially on July 14th. I'm trying to keep this on a schedule and keep things going, but also trying to respect the fact that staff has got to have time to prepare different things. Does that?
I think if you wanted to proceed that way, we could provide a general overview of what our understanding is of the proposed project and
The developer can be
impacts,
here, he can explain what's going on, can answer questions.
the
And the intent is
the
to not,
infrastructure impacts.
to not limit or make people feel they're getting cut out of the mustard. But the point is, otherwise you're going to have that item will take 2-3 hours, 4 hours long. And we got other business to take care of. Does that make sense?
So are you saying you want that on the 23rd as a staff presentation with no input from the public?
Correct. But there's also no decisions being made that night. It's
Mhm.
basically a information presentation
On the airport site, the one
on
that
the
was-
airport site, which has already been developed. But it will get I think it will counter, or at least get out, what this particular project is actually being proposed.
I like this. I'll move that we put this on this matter on the agenda for June 23rd.
Okay?
With your
Proposed scenario.
Yep.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
And just as information exchange,
No decisions.
and the public would have the opportunity to give input at a separate meeting dedicated to that purpose.
Regarding data center, which basically follows your motion, which would follow, but then they would also have information regarding this project already in their,
Yeah.
in their,
Like it.
in their, I'm losing track, file folder in their mind, so to speak.
Sure.
That makes sense?
Okay.
And I'm trying to accelerate it.
I think it needs to be clear that there is no public input
Right.
at that meeting if we approve it.
And
No
there's also no,
public
de-
input or no decision.
and also
Yes,
no
yeah,
decision.
But I mean, it needs to be absolutely clear to people so they don't come expecting
To give.
their usual
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
input.
All right. Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Okay, now, I don't like trying to schedule meetings on the fly here.
30.
And also, we want to make sure that we get, what's that? Right.
Yeah.
No, I'm trying to keep this thing moving as quickly as possible. So for people who would be interested in attending the special meeting that Brown mentioned, how we're going to get that information out quickly to people once it's known. I can call a special meeting.
We
If
could
we-
have the dates.
So we'll want to poll council first of all, make sure they can be here. What's your schedule? What's everyone's schedules on July 1st or June
Why
June
can't it
30th.
be? Yeah,
30th?
June 30th.
Tuesday.
June
Let's
30th
do a
is
poll
Tuesday.
afterwards.
What's that?
Let's just
Well,
do the
do
poll
we need it
afterwards.
for the vote though?
No, we already.
I can,
I gotta look at my
Yeah.
calendar.
all right. Okay, so we will work together, poll, and if it is, then we can get that information out in a press release and let people know what's going on, essentially.
Can I ask a question?
No, sir, you may not.
This is important for the public. So the purpose of that meeting is to just get feedback on generic terms, feelings about data centers, both pro and con, or about that specific project.
This project. I
The
think.
project,
This concept of this particular data center concept.
the one we're going to show you on the
Smaller
Tuesday.
Mhm.
23rd.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Just want to make sure because we're going to publicize.
yeah,
it.
it can also be in general too. I mean, yeah, they may have an opinion on one versus another too. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then then you can look at the schedule for memo.
I'll talk to Mark.
We'll talk to Mark about that. Okay. Anything else? All right, council comments. Rachel, anything tonight?
Nope, nothing for me.
Gloria?
Nope.
Amber?
No.
No, I would just mention if anybody's listening, that, our motions related to this topic aren't indicative yet of support or not. We're just getting this dialogue going with the public, right? Which I think is important. So that's all.
While also respecting the fact that someone has asked to be considerate, so we're taking care of that as well too.
Sure.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. Tim?
Well, I have to give a couple kudos tonight. Juneteenth was a very successful event. Anita, were you a part of the planning of that? So well done. And Vanessa and the team who planned that. Great event. And right outside there, we have Schenker Plaza is functioning. So the city needed a touchdown. And so that's fun to have that. And I'll put a plug in. There's lots of good activities going on. Names next 2 weekends, Story Theater Company, Newsies. Great program next 2 weekends. So see the website for that. But that's all I have tonight.
There's another one on 28th. Ames Triathlon.
Yeah, there we go.
That'll be happening Sunday morning, June 28th at 7 o'clock. Steve, are you in that?
I'm in the first leg.
All right. All right.
I was just going to say that Gloria was very involved too. In that.
Yep. Great.
Very good. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move you adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Ames City Council meeting credits.